Hey guys, YS Helper just uploaded their 5.1 Abyss usage rate results from day 1. And I thought it'd be quite interesting just to go through the app data, see what stands out, see what people have been playing on their new characters, and see if there's any surprises or things you may not have expected. Of course, before we get started, don't take these too seriously. That's just how usage rate surveys are. It does have a sample size of over 80k samples, which is a lot of data, don't get me wrong, but as you know, there are a few things. Number one, usage is mostly useful for popularity and trends, especially day 1, but not really for strength. A lot of players, especially from the CN communities that this survey comes from, generally stick to what they know works well. For example, a lot of people have noticed Child International generally is more popular on day 1 data compared to maybe after a week, because many players have been playing that team for years and they're very comfortable with it and they get their primo gems with it before maybe experimenting with other teams. So importantly, these usage rate surveys doesn't necessarily mean something more popular is necessarily more stronger. It is what it is. Secondly, even though 80k samples is a lot, it's still just a small percent of the Genshin community, and they can either be more hardcore than average or more casual than super tryhards, depending on your perspective. Anyway, for starters, what is this current Abyss about? Now, of course, as with most Abysses, this Abyss is biased, and I think it's biased towards res shred and also with geo characters and also with shielders. A lot of people know these consecrated beasts. They're quite annoying to play, they're very dangerous. But what's quite interesting about them is that they have increased resistances for most of the fight. And if you didn't know, this means that res shred from characters like xilonen, kazuha, zhongli actually get stronger than they normally are. For example, I just did a quick calculation here. Xilonen's shred usually gives maybe 25% damage increase for a typical 10% res enemy. But against these consecrated beasts, it can go even to 60. It of course makes sense why they'd put these enemies in. Kazuha has slightly more res shred than her, which means he gains slightly more as well. But interestingly, I'm sure you guys have realized there isn't that much grouping to be done in this Abyss. So putting 2 and 2 together is quite clear that that is how they're trying to sell Xilonen. Obviously, she is a very strong support, but making her res shred stronger, making Kazuha's grouping less valuable, just gives her an extra edge. And then on top of that, you would have noticed Chamber 2 bottom half, Chamber 3 bottom half are Geo Shield bosses, which means funny enough, this Abyss is actually quite biased towards zhongli, which is actually something I predicted could happen in my previous video. If you guys remember, I said in that video that a lot of the time when they try to sell Geo characters, there's a good chance they will put these Geo bosses, and I didn't know that was going to happen, but as it turns out, that's exactly what they did. And as you guys have seen, zhongli has increased shield breaking versus these guys. You can see it's quite crazy how fast he can break geo shields, even more than other geo characters. So it should be no surprise that zhongli is very high in his usage this Abyss, whether you're using him for his shielding on the top half or you're using him for his geo shield break on the bottom half. Now of course you might notice Xilonen is also up there, very strong support. If we look at the teams she's played with, surprise surprise, is dominated by Neuvillette. It's actually Neuvillette's most popular team by far. You might be wondering, how can so many people play Neuvillette without a shield, especially versus these consecrated beasts or these bosses on the bottom half? And a little known fact, Neuvillette here, owned by almost 60k other users, actually has one of the most craziest constellation rates among this community. You can see less than half of the people own C0, 40% with C1. And of course, what does that mean? It means most people have infinite interrupt resistance on him, which basically negates the need for shields and basically negates the need for zhongli, at least for more than half of the users. Now obviously that's not to say you can't play this Xilonen team without a shield, but that was expected. Of course, I'm not saying 100% of the users are C1 and above Neuvillettes, but a good amount of them probably are. And it is still interesting that zhongli and baizhu still have decent usage, even though so many of these Neuvillettes have C1. But that is something important to know. Even though Xilonen is a very good buffer for him, if you don't have his C1, you might be better off sticking with one of these other shielding characters. You can see most other teams aside from number 1, baizhu with his interrupt resistance, Charlotte with the freeze, zhongli shielding, baizhu again. If you guys were interested in Xilonen's constellation rate, it's a decent C0 ownership rate. Definitely a decent amount of people going for C2, but it's not as much as main DPS characters like Neuvillette, Hu Tao, Raiden Shogun. Now here I've got other xilonen teams. You can see here Navia. But if you look at Navia teams, you may or may not be surprised about this, but xilonen isn't necessarily her most popular teammate. And that's probably because, as we've been saying, most people are playing their Geo teams on the bottom half. You can also play overload teams on the bottom half, and you can play your Geo team on the top half. But for most players who don't have massive rosters, they're probably playing their Geo team on the bottom half. And as we know, zhongli's shielding there is just too good and it's just too comfortable. Xilonen is of course a damage upgrade over zhongli in this team, but it's not a massive upgrade, and as people might have expected, at that point there's a good chance people would just prefer the older teams with Navia. There's zhongli, there's Chiori. Xiangling is of course a bit more popular than Farina. And also this Navia team would let you play your Farina and your Xilonen with your neuvillette as well. So it's important to factor that in too. We're not saying xilonen isn't Navia's strongest Geo support, but as many people have seen in testing, she isn't a huge upgrade, and the opportunity cost of putting her with your Navia instead of with your other team is a good chance you'd rather play her with your topside team. Arlecchino double Geo, another pretty popular Arlecchino team, is a biz. Mualani's most popular team. This might be surprising, double Geo, but funnily enough, I actually predicted that could have been the case yesterday on stream with Jeff. But I'm actually guessing like a double Geo might actually be popular for casuals, for comfy play. Like, it sounds dumb, but like I can see like xilonen and zhongli being pretty popular for like an Unga Bunga team. It's basically like Candace with less damage, but you have a shield. Just a comfortable way of playing Mualani. You might have noticed, but she doesn't have the highest usage rate. That's probably because she's just not the easiest character to play for the average player. So that may or may not be surprising to you, I'm not sure. But that's, like I said, day one, many players might just prefer using a more straightforward, easy to play team rather than a more harder to play Mualani team, which is something they might do later if they're trying to do speed runs or whatever. If you wanted to see zhongli's most popular teams, Navia, Ito, Arlecchino teams, Hu Tao double Hydro, Tainari, it's all very expected, and yeah, most people are playing him on the second half. Here's Farina's highest usage teams. As always, is very dominated by neuvillette, and that goes back to what people have been noticing for the past year, which is that if your characters are popular with neuvillette, they will have high usage. A lot of his most popular teammates are always up here. That's just how dominant he is. Here's Arlecchino's most common teams. You may or may not be surprised that there aren't that many shieldless teams. There is a very strong speedrunning Arlecchino team here at number 9 with Kazuha Xilonen. A lot of players are liking this team these days because it has better AoE than a vape team, and the setup is also a lot easier. But for the average player, they do like the shield, especially against his second half enemy. If you can't heal with Arlecchino, she'll die very quickly, and yeah, most people just won't bother with that. Now as for Kinich, if you were curious, there's a bit over 20k people that own him in this out of 80k, which is slightly more than Mualani, and a lot more people are using him than Mualani, leading to, as we saw, he has a higher usage rate. And here are the teams. Now obviously that doesn't mean that he's a stronger character than Mualani. What it probably means is that he's just easier to play, more comfortable to play. And as you can see here, he doesn't have a standout team in terms of full-on usage rate, but the two highest ones do have defensive utility with Dia, Toma. His main offensive team is the number 4 one here, but going for a comfortable team, the top 3, that would explain it. It's useful to not just look at the UR but also the AR, because the AR is like the amount of teams submitted, whereas the UR factors in how rare a teammate is. For example, the team number 5 has higher AR than number 4, but that's because Emily is a less owned character than zhongli, so actually more people are technically playing him with the zhongli Bennett Xiangling than the Emily Bennett Xiangling, but it's that Emily is more rarer. Mualani, she doesn't really have a standout popular team. They're kind of all over the place. As I said, there are more comfortable teams, there are more higher ceiling teams, like maybe team number 2 is a higher ceiling team. But what is interesting for her is like there are some teams that are more popular on the second half, and there's a team like number 2 which is more popular on the first half. I think it mostly just comes down to which teams have zhongli. Zhongli is just that dominant on the second half regardless of the team. And yeah, here are the Hu Tao usage rates. Nothing really has changed that much. Her highest usage teams have always been with zhongli, even if they aren't necessarily the most strongest ones. Although people are playing her with xilonen here, number 3, I just wouldn't expect it to be at the top. especially because, like I said before, players might rather save their xilonen and their farina with their other team, maybe their neuvillette team. Here are the overall team usages, so the most popular teams overall. You can see the team with both the highest usage rate and the actual usage rate is by far the new neuvillette team. As we've said, she's a good damage buff for him, and also more than half of the players in this survey have C1, so they don't need the shielding anyway. But the baizhu team is still decently popular for players who might not have that C1. And then there's a standard Al Haytham team, standard Navia team with zhongli on side 2, standard Hu Tao, Ito, another Navia team, arlecchino with zhongli. A lot of this is very standard, and in case you were interested, there is a cheeky Ayaka freeze mentioned here. Decent amount of people are playing that on the top half, which is cool because you can utilize freeze on the top half of this abyss. Lastly, I've got the trends data here. You can see a lot of the geo characters are trending upwards. Obviously it's a geo friendly abyss, as I said. Even albedo is here, and yeah, neuvillette getting even more popular. I did forget to mention, but these consecrated beasts have higher resistances to their element as well. So the pyro vulture has higher pyro res, and the electro scorpion has extra electro res. So what does that leave you with? It leaves you with neuvillette. But it also makes sense because electro pyro overload teams, they also work well on the bottom half, breaking geo shields here, here and here. So yeah, they either want you to play overload or geo teams on the bottom half, which would explain Chevris getting a small uptick as well. Not huge, but a small one. And Shenhe and Ayaka because freeze is effective in the top half too. Lastly, the downward trend characters. I guess you could make a trend that a lot of this is dendro teams, and xilonen obviously isn't that synergistic with dendro teams. But what might be important to notice is the baizhu decrease, and I think that's less to do with dendro teams and more to do with neuvillette teams. Of course, the thing with baizhu is he was kind of just pretty comfortable with neuvillette. He wasn't necessarily doing that much, so as soon as another healer comes in like xilonen, who actually provides some very good buffs and debuffs, that would explain why he's quite easy to replace there, and that would explain a lot of players probably just doing a straight up switch. Whereas a character like zhongli, even though xilonen is also stronger than him, he still has that unique value of the shield and the shield break. So you could say zhongli retained more value than baizhu did with xilonen for neuvillette teams. And yeah, here are the overall ownership rates. So out of this 80k people, 68% of them pulled xilonen, which to me actually sounds like quite a lot. Of course, it's not as high as like Kazuha Farina, but maybe this will get higher as the weeks progress. Her ban is still on. And then Kinich, another recent character, a pretty modest 26% ownership rate. Him and Mualani are kind of around the same, with Kinich being easier to play, mualani being harder to play. If I had to guess, honestly, I think a lot of players are kind of just saving for the pyro archon. And it's fair to expect the pyro archon probably is going to be one of those characters where like 90% of people pull for them. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. Again, try not to take usage rates too seriously. For me personally, I don't take it seriously in terms of like the popularity. It doesn't correlate with strength. But in this video today, the way I showed you all the different teams and the different constellation ownerships and trying to find trends, that I do find quite useful, at least useful for what it is. So let me know if you'd like me to continue making these kind of videos. Maybe I'll make it again when the abyss resets again, rather than just focusing on the clickbait like this page here. Anyway, thanks for watching and bye for now.